Hi, this is Leslie Orloff. I wanted to welcome you all here. I'm the Director of the National Immigrant Women's Advocacy Program, NIWAP, at American University Washington College of Law. And today we're going to be talking about the range of different forms of technical assistance that are available through NIWAP to assist you in a wide range of matters. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Alicia to talk about kind of the webinar system and how it will work. While she's doing that, just to get you guys used to the system, can you type in where you're from and what the weather is right now? Patricia?
Yes, so we will be utilizing the hand raise feature during today's webinar. And in order to do that, there's a small icon on the top of your screen, and you can just click on that when we get to that portion of the webinar. You can also, again, chat in the public chat box to the right there. We will also have polling questions as well, so keep an eye on that. And if, let's see here, I'm just trying to make sure. And if you are having audio issues, again, let me know in the private chat box. But other than that, Leslie, I think we're good to go on the technology part.
Okay. So this webinar is being presented we're TA providers from the Office of Violence Against Women. And again, I'm Leslie Orloff, and I direct the National Immigrant Women's Advocacy Project. I am a family lawyer by trade, although I've been involved in both drafting and helping implement various provisions involved with self-petitioning, U visas, T visas, and the like, and really happy to be here today. Rocio?
Hi, everyone. I'm Rocio Molina. I'm the Associate Director at the National Immigrant Women's Advocacy Project. I have helped immigrant clients file VAWA and U visa applications, and if you have questions like that, you might be getting technical assistance from me on those issues.
So our learning objectives, what the goals for this webinar today is, by the end of the webinar, you'll be more familiar with the kinds of technical assistance and resources that are available here at NIWAP through us, and what might be also available through us connecting you with other technical assistance providers nationally. And you'll understand kind of the wide range of topics and the wide range of professionals that we work with who can support your work with survivors. So who are we? NIWAP, we're a national TA provider. We provide technical assistance and advocacy and training that promotes the implementation and use of laws, policies, and practices with the goal of improving legal options, legal rights, and access to services for immigrant survivors of domestic violence, sexual violence, stalking, human trafficking, child abuse, and other crimes. The forms of, and we provide technical assistance to a wide range of professionals. We do a lot of work, as Michael can tell you a little bit later on in the program, with police and sheriffs and prosecutors. We also do a lot of work with judges, and a significant over 50 or 60% or 50% of our TA work is for advocates and attorneys working with immigrant survivors in the field. And that we work with survivors and their children, and we work at the state. We help you kind of provide strategies at the state, federal, and the local level. And the types of things we can do include individual case consultations, and you'll hear some examples of those today. We have training materials and practice tools. We also can do legal research or draft motions, and sometimes we have samples, sometimes we'll work with you to develop them. We have access to legal briefs for immigration cases, for family law cases. We also do in-person trainings. So in April of 2019 and April of 2020, we're going to be hosting an OVW grantee training that OVW grantees are invited to attend. We also will be offering a number of webinars. We have a 24/7 web library that has where, let's say you did this training today and you, let's say, didn't think you needed to know necessarily very much about public benefits, and then a client walks in and she needs TANF and you're trying to figure out what she's eligible for in your state, you can actually go into our library and look up information about immigrant victims' legal rights to public benefits, different kinds of services, family law. There are training videos. You can view 24/7 prior videos. We also can help in developing our policies and protocols. So, for example, we've worked with law enforcement agencies writing U-Visa certification policies. We just assisted San Francisco Superior Court in writing their first U-Visa certification protocol. We also kind of help you think about strategies for removing systemic barriers, and then something we're really excited about and we'll be talking a lot about is we have a community of practice for family lawyers who, a couple of our members are on the phone today. I'll be talking to you a little bit where family lawyers can get ongoing, continuing education, peer-to-peer opportunities to learn from each other and for us to kind of problem solve issues that arise in family court. And then we have a parallel to that, which are roundtables that Investigator Leverrier, who's on the phone today, is one of the leads on, and those are opportunities for law enforcement to talk with law enforcement about language access, working with immigrant crime victims, U-Visa certifications, and the like. And then we have a listserv, which is really more like it's an outreach list that we share the latest policies and information that's available, that becomes available, new training tools and information opportunities for trainings and webinars that we encourage you to sign up for. Rosia?
So here's the new on the screen, and you can go into it on the web page. It's NIWAP, NIWAP, library.wcl.american.edu. This is where we have a collection of every material that we produce and tools, and so we encourage you to visit that. It also has a really neat search bar where if you're not really sure what exactly you're looking for, you can put in there similarly as you would with Google, and you can put in U-Visa or U-Visa certification or whatever topic you're looking for and get more details on it. Some of the topics that we have under there where you can find the information and statutes and training tools are VAWA, U-Visa, gender-based asylum, special immigrant juvenile status, information on VAWA confidentiality, and we intended to be user-friendly and stuff that you can, we even have brochures there, and we'll have another slide on that so that you can see materials on language access, on legal service access, immigration allegations in custody or protection orders or divorce, information on public benefits, as Leslie said, broken down into health care, housing, TANF, information on working with survivors on cultural issues, religious or immigration needs, and also information on trauma-informed help for immigrant survivors.
Oops, sorry. So some of the unique resources that we offer is we work with you at NIWAP. You can call us if you're, let's say, you're starting to work with an immigrant survivor and you're trying to figure out, in your case, what are the safety concerns, or how do you want to plan your case? Are you going to do the immigration case first? Are you going to do the protection order case first? What are the pros and cons of those kinds of decisions? So we can help you on individual cases in a variety, and looking at those overlaps between immigration, family law, benefits, and the like. We have interactive benefits and demographics map that you can go on the web and see what benefits are available in your state. We're going to be updating that over the next 6 months, but it's a resource available now. We have the web library. We also have a directory of programs that we've been able to identify state by state who have real-life experience working with immigrant survivors. So if you're doing that work in your state and you're not in our directory, send us an email to info@niwap.org, and we'll send you information about how to sign up on the directory. In fact, we'll send that anyway to all of you after the webinar with a link to the materials and the recording of this webinar. And the other thing is we can bring trainings to your state. So we have, through our law enforcement grant, and we're looking for jurisdictions to do trainings for police and prosecutors on U-Visa, language access, and working with immigrant survivors. If you're interested in having us come to your state, we've done a number of trainings for STOP administrators who've brought us in, or where STOP administrative funds have paid us to come to a state. So we can do a variety of different things to make trainings possible that you might need in your state.
Okay, so here we wanted to share with you the page of the directory of the providers. And there you can put, so an example would be somebody calls us and says, we have a survivor, I'm working with her safety planning, but we think that she needs help getting a divorce or having issues with custody with her kids. And here in the directory of providers, you just, if you don't know the organization, but you know the city or the state, we can help you try to find an organization who we know has worked with survivors before that, or that maybe that attended one of our trainings that can maybe could help you be a resource for that survivor. So the web page for it is www.niwap.org/directory. And as Leslie said, you might want to just after the webinar do a search for your organization and see if the information is updated or if we need to make changes or add someone else that you think is a good resource for survivors.
Right, and when you, this is Leslie again, when you add it, it goes into our directory, and then about once a week we review them and approve them, and then they go into the directory live. So you're actually entering your own information. Okay. So we also, as I said, like this, we offer webinars and in-person trainings. The webinars are on the TA to TA calendar. And you can see webinars and information from us and other TA providers throughout the year. We also periodically send out newsletters, and we link people to tools and materials. And then we're always available for technical assistance at the email and phone number on your screen. And you can either call or email us. We usually get back within 24 hours. And then we can also, when there's an overlap of issues, we'll connect you with TA providers. So for example, let's say you're working on a U-Visa certification issue and you have some questions around the U-Visa case and how it's structured, but your law enforcement officer who you're asking for cert has some questions. We can help you on your case prep side, but we can connect you with Michael or other officers who can talk to the officer directly. So there's various different ways we can do that. Some of the other resources on our web library is we post all of the DHS and other government materials that help immigrant survivors that are important to the cases that we do. So it's a kind of one-stop shop where you can find. Sometimes people tell us in government it's easier to find the materials on our website than theirs. So we try to keep that all up to date. We have brochures, Know Your Rights brochures in various languages. We have language access and public benefits materials and charts, a whole range of judicial bench cards. So if you're a family lawyer and you're working in a case and you want to educate the judge, or let's say you just want to educate judges in your community, you can give them the bench cards we have. Those have been developed with State Justice Institute and Office of Violence Against Women Act funding. And we also have tools for law enforcement and prosecutors. Oops, sorry.
Okay, so for the next part of the webinar, what we're going to do is we're going to walk you through six different topics that we provide TA on. And throughout each of the topics, we're going to just go back to the same case study and show you how this example of TA could intersect with each of these different topics. So starting here, a Southeast Asian survivor nervously comes to your office. She speaks very little English. She shares with you that her husband gets very angry. She wants to stay at the shelter with her children for just one night, and if she had any money, she would go to a hotel and then go back with her husband tomorrow. So here, one of the discussion questions is, how would you talk about abuse with her? We see there that he gets very angry, but what exactly does that mean? And then here we wanted to share with you the Immigrant Power and Control Wheel, which we've used, and I've used talking to survivors about, what exactly does very angry mean? What is it? What are the tactics that he's using? And how you can identify maybe what she's going through, or help her put words into, not put words, but helping her identify what tactic, if any, is being used here by her abuser.
So going back to Rocio's question that she answered a moment ago, perhaps in the chat box you could type, or if you could unmute people, Patricia, perhaps people could share, how do you approach the talking to victims about abuse, particularly when you're talking about immigrant victims, so there are special issues you're encountering. Anybody? Rosie, you can continue if you want while we're waiting for responses. Multiple people typing. So Sarah Martinez talks about, starting with talking to people about feeling safe. Other people?
Okay, so Olga shares, the Power and Control Wheel, Immigrant Power and Control Wheel is available in Spanish. We'll share it with the group as well.
And then we have other materials in Spanish, Know Your Rights, that covers family law, public benefits, immigration, in a variety of languages. And then somebody else is talking about being prepared to be able to use a telephonic interpreter or some kind of a remote video interpreter. Those are all really good. I'll post in a moment the link to the multilingual materials. Ro, back to you.
Okay, so the one last person shared that asked questions about how the husband might respond after she left only one day and returned. And then, Perna, would you like to chime in on the last comment you just put on the chat?
I was just confused on the focus on Spanish when we have a client that's Southeast Asian. That's all I was kind of focusing on. Right. So are we having beyond Spanish? And I mean, I think a lot of people think when they're providing multicultural and bilingual services, it can only be Spanish, and yet there's so many other languages that we need to make sure we're ready to have and address.
Absolutely. Right. And the multilingual materials we have available in different ones at different stages of translation, but right now we have Arabic, Chinese, French, Gujarati, Haitian Creole, Hindi, Japanese, Korean, Russian, Spanish, Tagalog, Vietnamese, and English. So that's what we have so far. I also, with some materials in Thai as well. But yes, your point is a really important one, that we're going to be encountering survivors from a wide range of backgrounds and languages that they speak. And the hardest ones are actually people who speak languages other than Spanish. Rosia?
Right. So, one of the considerations to think of is, at what point do you want to raise the immigration status? What are some of the signs that might lead you to ask? How would you ask that question without scaring or concerning the client? And why it's important to ask sooner rather than later? So as advocates working closer, we think they definitely have a role in how to identify potential immigration remedies. And we want you to have a holistic approach. We think that's the best practice because there are many needs that might not be that she needs at that time. There's a role for advocates to assist in filing or collecting evidence for immigration relief, assisting in distributing information about immigration relief like DHS brochures, providing that language access, and knowing how to obtain accurate information about the current immigration laws, policies, and practices.
Right, and one of the things that's really interesting is that we found that where advocates and attorneys collaborate, the results are can be really great, and because the victim advocates oftentimes have a longer relationship and potentially a more trusting longer-term relationship than the lawyers do. And so having that kind of, and they also often, particularly culturally specific, people that come from culturally linguistic communities that are similar to the clients, they have an access and understanding that really, I think, benefits the case. And then there are some communities, Patricia, can I do a poll? Can I have people raise their hands? How many of you are coming from rural communities? Is it possible there's Patricia, do you want to describe where the hand-raising thing is? Some people figured it out. It's up at the top on the left.
Yeah, it's on the top of their screen, and it looks like we have a few people raising their hand. I don't know if you can see the count on your screen, but there are about 15, 20 people now.
Good. Yeah, we can't see the count. You can, but that'd be great. So those of you, particularly in rural communities, it's important to understand that sometimes as an advocate, you're not always going to be able to find, for example, an immigration lawyer that knows anything about working with crime victims or anything about VAWA Tier U, the immigration relief available to crime victims. And so sometimes it's important because the advocate may know more than, the attorney that's going to charge money, for example. And so we can help get you to attorneys that have experience in this area in their states, but also understanding that advocates and attorneys working together can actually help spread the legal services where there are attorneys available by kind of lightening the load on the attorneys so that they can represent more people in the time that they have. So where we're going to start now is we're going to focus on kind of some cultural consideration issues and family law, with particular focus on some of our family law TA. So going back to the same hypo, the point here is that what we're talking about, she comes nervously, and then she's planning on returning to her husband tomorrow. What do you think, or how would you approach, what do you think some of her needs may be for this victim? And again, if you could type them in, or again, you can unmute people and they can speak if you'd like to. Multiple people typing. Again, anybody who'd like to speak, or any of the speakers who'd like to jump in while we're waiting would also be great. Carly, Aparna, Susan, what are some of the things that you guys see when people come into your offices?
Hi, this is Susan. So oftentimes we find people don't want to go to shelters because of cultural issues and or religious and food issues. I'm not sure if that's what you're talking about. Yeah. So, for example, a lot of shelters are great and doing a great service, but have a lot of rules, and maybe somebody, say, can't cook kosher food or halal food. They might feel a little bit uncomfortable about practicing their religion there at a shelter, and we often find that it's just, even if the person might want to go to the shelter, that because they feel just so alienated and don't speak English, that they're really afraid to do so.
Good. Wonderful. Thank you. And some of the things that people are contributing is concerns about financial issues, safety planning. There's one suggestion I really like. It's something we used to do when I was at IUT all the time, is giving her a number and making sure she knows she can call you, and that it's, if she, any time in the future if she chooses to leave again, looking at what kind of support system she has, etc. And then also...
this is Mike. I just wanted to real quick just say, from a law enforcement perspective, I think when I see her making this statement very angry, it makes me think that there's a good possibility there might be some physical abuse going on and stuff too. So maybe at that level, it's at least a good opportunity to open up that conversation, and hopefully if there's a good collaboration and coordination with your law enforcement folks in your jurisdiction, you could at least have that as an option if, she's properly advised as to what the procedure is. And of course, the whole immigration status thing is going to come up, and, we can talk later on about how to tackle that. But that's a good kind of entry point into the full circle, which would be in a great situation, working with the advocacy program and the client with law enforcement and getting a 918B certification signed.
Great, thanks, Mike. So yes, from what we're seeing, there's like people are mentioning different needs. There's a holistic approach, and with all victims, but with immigrant survivors in particular, that holistic approach is really, really important. And when you're talking about family law, for example, one of the things, as one of the persons in the chat box said, is that they want the violence to stop. They're not necessarily ready to leave permanently. And in fact, one of the things that we find with immigrant survivors, because of all the things we were talking about, the language access issues, the issues about culture and religion, and how they might not be as comfortable going to a shelter as, or not as willing to do that. So one of the things in family law that we can do, and we've been doing this a lot since the 80s, is getting you can get a protection order for somebody that we call I can't remember the name they use in Illinois, but it's a protection order that just orders him to stop the violence. It's not requiring separation. And
no violent
so
contact
get a protection order that says, stop the abuse.
We call it no abuse, Leslie.
There are no abuse orders, right, Mike? And so that they can stay together and still have a protection order. And it's something that a lot of people don't think about doing because you assume they're going to leave. But with immigrant survivors, I've had lots and lots of cases where that first piece of paper began to shift the power balance in the relationship, and she remained with him, but actually got some protection that ultimately allowed her to be able to take steps in the future. So, no abuse orders are really, really an important part of the creative protection order remedies you can get. Other kinds of creative protection order remedies that are available that help immigrant survivors is perpetrators can be ordered to stop immigration-related abuse. They can be ordered not to call DHS and turn her in. They can be ordered not to withdraw papers they filed for her. You can get, as I said, protection for victims still living with their abusers, but you can also, if you're working on an immigration case, as we'll be talking about later, as a family lawyer, you can help get various documents that will help the victim prove her immigration case, and we'll be talking later on about some of the kinds of immigration relief that's available. Protection orders can be very effective in deterring parental kidnapping, which is a big issue that we've talked about a lot in our community of practice, and it's a serious issue when you have a foreign-born perpetrator in particular, and particularly people who are dual nationals, where he could, he has nationality in 2 countries and can readily travel. We can addressing child support and spousal support is important. We have lots of materials on something called an affidavit of support, which is a document that in an immigration case the perpetrator would file, and you can potentially enforce in family court. And we also do a lot of work both in the family law area and around and in the public benefits area about health insurance and access to health care.
Leslie, can I jump in for a second? It's Susan.
Absolutely, sure.
I just wanted to say also that sometimes it's really helpful for the client to know you can hook them up with other resources. So just going back to the holistic services for a moment, just talking to the victim or survivor about other resources you can link them up to. We have modified a screening tool that I think we got from NIWAP NIWAP,
Yeah.
that we have sort of modified so we can, screen for all the issues that we and our partners in our LAV grant can assist with, which is a really great tool. And we've started having not just the family law and immigration attorneys use it, but attorneys in other units use it, and paralegals for screening, so we can really hook people into all the resources.
Wonderful. Thank you, Susan. And so essentially what we can provide in addition, like as Susan's talking about, is support for lawyers when culture, immigration status, language ability kind of get raised in family court. And we have lots of tools, legal research, manuals, motions, bench cards, on a whole range of family court issues. We do a lot of technical assistance around custody cases in addition to protection orders, child support, spousal support, divorce, discovery. And I think, Susan, we've done some of this with you, and I'm not sure with Carly, but we have, part of our TA is we have a whole bunch of law students who are sitting outside my door, and they love to do research. So if you need something quickly in a case, or there's an issue that, you don't have the time, with your resources to do research, we either may have it or we may be able to provide it pretty quickly. So it's one of the things that, and we really love doing for you. So, Ro?
So we talked about earlier the community of practice. This is a virtual community of practice for family law lawyers. We meet monthly for about 60 minutes, and we use a webinar platform here with NCJ, FCJ, and conference call also. You can call in and chat or answer questions for you. And it gives an opportunity to share your experiences and challenges, what work, what barriers you've encountered among the attorneys, and they can give each other ideas or peer-to-peer mentoring, and it's from basic issues to advanced issues. So we invited one of the members to join us today to talk about her experience. Susan?
Yes, hi again. So we are a LSC-funded legal aid organization, and we have an LAV grant to provide family law. My office does the family law piece, and we work in conjunction with an immigration organization that does the U visas and other immigration relief, and then other legal services to try and provide holistic services for immigrant survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence. So some of the times when we've really run into a wall and have called for assistance are usually around immigration, the intersection of immigration and our custody cases. For example, right now we have been getting some assistance in a case in which our client has several children with her abuser, and she has, well, first I think we had to figure out if she could leave the state, and so we talked about some relocation issues and UCC JEA issues and jurisdictional stuff. And then we ran into a problem where her abuser had acknowledged paternity in another country, actually in Russia, but then we found out that the child who he had acknowledged paternity for and helped get a U.S. passport for may not be his biological child, and he's now trying to have a paternity test done. And we were really concerned about what the immigration consequences would be and how to go about figuring out what to do. Do we challenge the paternity and try and argue paternity by estoppel? What could be the possible immigration consequences for our client? Because if she's here conditionally, if she were to be found to have committed some kind of fraud on a child's immigration, that could jeopardize her immigration status as well as the child's. So we talked it through with Leslie and some other folks, and I think we actually have come up with a pretty good solution, and we found an expert in Russia to talk about what that acknowledgement of paternity means there versus what an acknowledgement of paternity in the U.S. or in Pennsylvania might mean. So that's one example of a situation where we really weren't sure kind of which issue to tackle first, and all the different immigration consequences of something like a paternity challenge.
Thank you for sharing that. That's a great example of what we do at the Community of Practice. There'll be another slide with the link of where the application is for that group. It is for family law attorneys, but if there's somebody you work with in partnership that you think would benefit from it, you can also share that information with them so that they can join or refer over to us. Another area where we do technical assistance, and it kind of goes hand in hand with the immigration remedies and with survivors, immigrant survivors in court, or with law enforcement, is language access and Title VI compliance. So let's go back and look at our study, right? We have a Southeast Asian survivor. She nervously comes to your office and she speaks very little English. And we touched about that earlier, about some of you shared that you have a map in your intake office so that she can show you where, what region she's from, so you can identify what her language needs are. So the question is here, how will you communicate with her? So let's do a quick poll. If you want to raise up your hands, how many of you have language access plans in your organization? And then the raise your hand is the icon with the hand raised on your left top.
What time of numbers are you seeing, Patricia?
They just keep coming in. Like 30, 40?
Great. So at least a third of you. Wonderful. So, okay, I'm looking for. So, these slides aren't. Okay. Go ahead, Rocio. So,
just to process what the chat says, the people are sharing that they've used the language line. They get a hotline number to get someone to speak with her in her language. And somebody also asked, what exactly is the language plan?
So Mike, do you want to talk about your language, a little bit about the language plan? Mike, is he muted? Oh. Rocio?
Just to give them a chance to come back in, but we did have another little poll, and it can get us talking about it. And you know, we have a whole webinar. We could probably spend a whole day talking about language access, but we wanted just to give you a little taste of the type of TA we do around language access, and we work with other TA providers that, you know, specialize on language access. But here we're asking, which is the correct answer? If you get federal funding, you A, are mandated to have an interpreter for all clients that access your services. B, should take responsible steps to provide LEP, so limited English proficient individuals with meaningful access to program and activities. C, have available material translated for all clients. D, none of the above. So let's do a quick poll there.
So it's looking like...
Yeah, go ahead.
It's looking like about a little over, almost 60% of you are saying it's the second one, should take reasonable steps to provide LEP, and about 30% of you, or whatever, I think those are percents, are talking about a mandate. The answer is actually B, is to take reasonable steps, and one of those reasonable steps is having a language access plan. And one of the reasons that's so important. Oops, I'm getting confused. The slides are out of order. Okay, that's so important is that effectively, if you think about it, the way I like to think about this is imagine somebody standing in front of a door, and there's a door that they could walk through to get help, but they actually can't see the door. It's not, it's like they can't see, they can't communicate. It's like the door becomes effectively closed, even though from your perspective you think it's open. But if you're not able to provide services beyond English and Spanish and somebody speaks another language, for example, your program is closed to them for all practical matters. And so it's really important to understand, and that's true both of your program, but also, there's advocacy that is part of our representation of clients if we're lawyers or our work with clients with other agencies. So we might have a police department that might not be providing access to somebody who doesn't speak English or Spanish. You might have trouble accessing the help from healthcare providers, et cetera. And so it's really important when there are language, and the other thing that can happen if you're a lawyer and you're working on cases and they didn't get qualified interpreters, let's say at a crime scene or in a hospital, you'll have conflicts between, let's say the hospital had an interpreter and the people at the crime scene didn't. You'll have a conflict between the victim said in her language the same thing both times, but they were written down differently because in one place there was a qualified interpreter and the other place there wasn't. And so it could be and that not providing any access to, because they don't speak a language you happen to have on staff or you haven't planned for, it violates federal law. And so what is that federal law? I mean, basically, under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, any government funded or government supported program must provide meaningful access to programs and benefits and services, to programs and to the programs and benefits they offer to people who are limited English proficient.
Lindsay, one thing I was going to say about this, and we're going to talk about training opportunities and TA opportunities, and that's where we really get into the nuts and bolts of how, especially with law enforcement, we do this and we do it right. But one thing just to have people kind of think about as this webinar ends, and you think about moving forward and how you're going to address this, is a very common practice in law enforcement around the country, including my agency. Up until surprisingly not that long ago, we are in a pretty regular practice of using bilingual officers to help investigate crimes such as sexual assault, domestic violence, and any other crime really that we respond to if the responding officers aren't bilingual or speak the language of the person trying to report that crime. And that is in direct violation of Title VI and the executive order that supports that. So it's really, I know, as you know, we travel around the country talking about this, and more often than not, we come across agencies, law enforcement agencies, where the practice is to use, bilingual staff or officers and not having qualified interpreters. And I have a lot to offer with that. I can touch base on it just a little bit later on in the presentation, but I would just offer to anyone that's looking to get some information on how to take the next steps to get a hold of us through your TA line, and we can help walk them through some of the things we've done here in Salem, which we feel like we've really taken some giant steps in complying with this Title VI and the executive order and doing things the right way.
So what's really interesting about what Michael is talking about is that when you look at, so the Department of Justice many years ago issued, they have a branch, they issued guidance essentially to the law enforcement field regarding language access, and they're particularly focused on crime scenes. And they created a model policy called City Center C or something like that. It's like City Center Model Policy. And what that model policy actually is over the years, we're talking for the last 20 years, 15, 20 years, since the 90s when the language access policies were implemented in the first place, through now, they've had a series of settlement agreements with law enforcement agencies that weren't providing language access. And so this model policy, the direction DOJ's requirements, came out of those settlement agreements. And it's really interesting because essentially what they say to law enforcement is that when you arrive, you get a 911 call and you show up on the scene. You're allowed, because at the time you show up on the scene, it's considered under the DOJ policy to be something called exigent circumstances. And what you're allowed to do under exigent circumstances is you want to try to pick the best person who speaks English and that language available to help you find the weapons, secure the scene, chase the perpetrator, et cetera, et cetera. But as soon as you've got everybody separated and calmed down and you're going to start asking questions that could lead to your police report, so you also have to figure out, do they speak English? Because sometimes people will say they speak English and they really don't. And so what kind of questions, we actually have some tools for law enforcement that are part of the work we've been working on developing with Michael and other officers is, it's like, what kind of questions can you ask that don't scare people away and don't ask questions that you would need for your police report? So, how far is your kitchen from here? Or something that you ask something so it's not a yes-no question, so you can get a feel, the officer can get a feel for whether the person speaks English. But the other point is that officers, when we train them to understand that they could have picked the perpetrator to interpret, and because they don't know. And they can't know until they get a qualified interpreter. And so and a lot of times they'll start with children because those are the people who are bilingual for this immediate step. But once they secure the scene, their obligation to get, they should be getting a qualified interpreter that is not a bilingual officer, and so that the records they create at the scene are going to create a court record that I can use in my family case, that the prosecutor can use to prosecute the perpetrator, and that is actually what the victim said. So we have, anything you want to add to that, Michael?
No, I think just the overarching theme that, this is something that we are required to do, and we have a very good reason to do it. I mean, when you're not doing this the right way, a whole lot gets missed, and just one level of that is safety, and it's officer safety, it's victim and anybody involved safety, it's community safety. So that's just one of many really good reasons why we should be, taking a different angle at this and doing it the right way.
Right. So what we do in terms of language access, we work very closely with the lead technical assistance provider on language access for OVW and other grantees, which is the Asian Pacific Institute on Gender-Based Violence. So if you think back to the case that Susan was talking about, let's say there was a language access in a case they were calling us on family law. We might have her work with the API, Institute on Gender-Based Violence, on the language access issues while we're working on the family law issues, and we'd all coordinate. We have tools and resources. We have a chapter of our manual on language access. We have the trauma-informed tool, I think, for interviewing that Susan was talking about. We currently have available in English, Spanish, and Russian, and we're looking to translate it into other languages. And it can be, a lot of people use it with interpreters, particularly with Asian languages. So we have lots of tools and resources available both on the NIWAP website and the API Gender-Based Violence website. And then the experts in the country on, how to develop a language access plan for your agency, or if you're working with a partner agency like a police department or prosecutor's office, and they want to develop a language access plan, API is the place to go, and we can connect you with them.
Leslie, this is a good chance to, and I know that I might be getting a tiny bit ahead, but it seems just natural to mention it now. Even though I've been working with you and NIWAP for a long time as a consultant and working on projects, as far as my agency goes, we reached out to you guys on a TA platform, and what Leslie's TA was able to provide was a contact with the Asian Pacific Institute, and they helped us bring in an expert who held 3 trainings for us that took a bunch of offices, bilingual civilian staff, and some other community members that worked at different agencies in our jurisdiction, and we have, as a result of that, over 50 qualified interpreters at our disposal with 14 different languages for face-to-face interpretation. So something as simple as just contacting, you guys through the TA avenue and getting pointed in the right direction really made a big difference here in our jurisdiction.
And Michael, I mean, I think you've done this with them over the last 6 months, right? I mean, it's something that
Yes.
would help you were able to pull in together pretty quickly.
Yes, it was. It's been within the last 6 months, and as a result of that, we are looking to hold one more training that we have some other funding access to, and we're going to bring the person back to hold one more and get hopefully another 24 to 30 people qualified as interpreters. And when people think about interpreters, they think about certified. They think about the courts and the medical profession. But in compliance of Title VI, specifically for us in law enforcement, the bad way of using bilingual officers, while doing it the right way, it's not miles away from that. You're bringing in your bilingual staff, and you're making sure they understand what it is to be an interpreter, the do's and don'ts, and that kind of thing. And just a day and a half training can take them to the point where they know what they're supposed to do.
Right.
One of the participants, Sarah Manriquez, shared the government recommendation on law enforcement planning to create a language access plan. So there's the website there on the chat as well.
Wonderful. And Aparna posted the link for the API website as well.
Thank you.
Over to you, Rocio.
So a large number of our technical assistance is focused on the immigration options for immigrant survivors. Let's look back at our study, right? I guess based on what she told us, are the survivor that comes into our program is she's South Asian. And she shares with you that she has little money, so maybe that this is a way for you to start talking about immigration status. Is she able to work? Does she not work? Somebody mentioned earlier, but if she has a non-immigrant visa where that does not allow her to work. So this could be an opportunity for you to ask a little bit about her immigration status and open the door to see what her needs are as far as immigration.
So there's a range of immigration relief available for immigrant survivors. All of that relief, which began being created in 1989 with the battered spouse waiver, all of them have been designed, that, the VAWA self-petition, the U-Visa, we'll talk about all of them in a few minutes. They've all been designed to improve access to justice, to help build community policing relationships so that victims are willing and able to come forward. It's also to increase prosecution of perpetrators, but equally to remove, I guess you could say, the way when we worked on the statute and negotiated the bipartisan support for it, everybody understood that in fact, there was a case actually in New York that happened while we were negotiating the bill, and it was a case of an immigrant survivor, an immigrant victim from, I think she was Central America, I think it might have been El Salvador, who was attacked by her husband with a machete and broke her arm in front of a nunnery with 5 nuns as witnesses. And the prosecutor said, I don't need the victim as a witness, I got all these nuns. And the victim was saying, she was married to a U.S. citizen, he was a naturalized citizen, and she said, I can't help, I can't testify, you can't go forward in the case, he'll get me deported. And the prosecutor called me and a woman named Jenna Calvo and said, well, can you stop the deportation? And back before VAWA, the answer was no. There was no, her only avenue to immigration status was through her husband filing a petition for her. And so, all of the Violence Against Women Act immigration protections, the U-Visa, VAWA, et cetera, were designed to allow victims to be able to come forward and report crimes and without fear of deportation, to remove the threat of deportation as a tool that perpetrators use effectively to silence victims. And that improves, by doing that, you're improving options and stability, economic security. When you have immigration relief, you're on a path to legal work authorization. And so it greatly improves victim safety when victims can control their own immigration case based on their crime victimization. And ultimately, as Michael said, it keeps communities safer when crime victims can come forward. And that was the purpose.
Here we wanted to share with you an infographic. It comes from Blue Campaign, but we linked it onto our website because it's great. These are some of the immigration remedies that we have a lot of information on our website, starting with the VAWA self-petition, the U visa for crime victims, continued presence, special immigrant juvenile status, asylum, and T visa. And then I'll share the link to the infographic shortly. Oh, and there it is. Thank you, Leslie.
I'll get the infographic. That's general. I'll be there in a minute.
Oh, thank you. But if you click on each part of the shield, right, because this is your protection infographic, it'll give you more details of what's the eligibility criteria, what could they get. It links you to the forms. It's great. And it also prints off really nice that you can share with other people within your agency. I shared it with our local judges here in El Paso. So we'll share that link with you, but this is one way to get started to talk about these immigration remedies available. We also have the brochures. They are from the Department of Homeland Security, but with the volunteers that we've had, we've been able to translate them into Spanish, Mandarin, English, Korean, and Russian, and hopefully we can expand our list. But there's also these brochures that you can share with survivors. So for immigration remedies, every now and then we'll have a webinar on that topic. At national conferences, we'll present on those topics, a newsletter. We have charts for screening, charts of what you can do to apply, what evidence you would need, what public benefits you would get depending on which status. Toolkits also on this information, and training manuals. And we also provide technical assistance by emailing us or calling us, and we can connect you with an immigration lawyer that specializes in that immigration remedy. For this portion, we invited Carly Bush from the Nebraska Coalition to End Sexual and Domestic Violence. She's has been at our conference and knows a great deal about VAWA and U visa and T visa. Carly?
Thanks, Rocio. As Rocio mentioned, I work exclusively with immigrant victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, stalking, and human trafficking. I work hand in hand with domestic violence and sexual assault advocates from across the state of Nebraska, and as was mentioned earlier, that has allowed us to give a lot better service to our clients because not only are we looking at their legal needs, but also at their physical needs. So I have used NIWAP in general, and Rocio and Leslie and Mike specifically, their expertise and knowledge many times over the years. I've been with the Coalition for 11 years. I was doing civil legal matters such as custody and protection orders, and then I had gone into the immigration side about 6 years ago. And even before NIWAP was in existence, I have definitely sought Leslie's expertise on many issues. And now my primary contact with NIWAP is typically through trainings and through TA on specific immigration issues. And just to give a basic example of a TA question that I had in a particular case a few years ago, our organization was working with its first person who was eligible for T non-immigrant status, which is a human trafficking visa. And while I had a lot of experience on the U visa side, I had next to none on the T visa, and really needed to have some good information both on the broad context, but also more specifically, such as public benefits of availability for my client. And so I was able to, one, access the website for NIWAP and review the just array of awesome resources available on the website, but also to speak with NIWAP staff and to discuss my specific concerns, and they were amazing with that. Also, I mean, I just have to say one thing that I've truly appreciated with NIWAP over the years, the trainings. Specifically, you know, I work a lot with law enforcement, prosecutors on UNT visa certifications, and Leslie had actually recommended Mike to come in and do a training in Nebraska several years ago, and one of the attendees at the training was the U-Visa certifier in a small rural town in central Nebraska, and he had been assigned by his chief to sign certifications. He didn't know exactly why, but he just, you know, if people appeared to qualify, he'd sign them. Well, he goes to this training and discovers why the U-Visa was created by Congress in the first place, and went back to his police department and started pulling the numbers of reports on domestic violence and sexual assault related crimes, and realized that, just as Mike had said, that the UNT visas could be used as a tool to encourage reporting of violent crime in his community. And so, I mean, right now we've got a guy who didn't know exactly why he was signing these, you know, several years ago, and who is now a hardcore believer that these are making his community safer. And he never would have done that without, you know, NIWAP staff and also with NIWAP consultants and Mike. So, I guess I've used like I mentioned earlier, I've used NIWAP both for broad policy questions, but also for more specific client-related questions, and I have always been extremely pleased with their response and with their willingness to assist me.
Thank you, Carly, very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And let me just say, as a TA provider, this is Leslie, for us, you know, the harder the better, the more interesting the questions. We are happy to help with the, you know, those of you that are just starting out with, you know, getting you the materials and resources and all of that, but we like people who pitch us questions we actually have to go figure out. So we try to do that full range. I did a very complex public benefits immigration question with some folks in Hawaii yesterday, where I was like scratching my head and they were scratching their head, and we kind of figured it out. But that's actually part of the fun and the challenge that, you know, keeps us on our toes, and the more we learn, the more we can share. Mike, over to you.
Yes, thanks, Leslie. That's actually a really good segue into some of the things I was thinking about when I think about, you know, the services provided and how you can utilize the TA. And it's not only that kind of stuff. It can also be, you know, live on-the-ground scenarios that are happening that, you know, maybe a community or a person on this webinar might need some assistance with getting through a sticky situation or not sure how to handle a situation. And we had a perfect example of that here not too long ago, just a couple months ago. We had an offender that used his relationship with a government employee to violate VAWA confidentiality, and basically had a victim that we were working with now presented in a different way, and she was now targeted at a local courthouse on some false information, and again, that violation of VAWA confidentiality. And I'm sure you remember, Leslie, I reached out through the TA process, and you know, we had to, you know, get some things in motion real fast, and in the end, to make a fairly long couple of hours or more into just a couple of statements, in the end, we ended up correcting that situation, providing protection, and you know, the person was now you know, not a part of the target. And in the end, it opened up some really rich conversations with some local government staffers and agencies that we now have some pretty good things in place that can help prevent that from happening in the future. So, you know, again, I don't want to get into details with, you know, specific agencies and obviously like divisions, that kind of thing, but the short example is we had a really bad situation happening here that happened on the fly late in the day that could have really affected this person and had them detained, and children involved as well. And because of reaching out to the TA and getting some stuff happening real quick, and I know, Lizzie, you reached out to several different other, folks nationally that assisted with it, we solved the problem and also made it a non-problem for the future. So
right.
I wanted to start with that.
Yeah, I'll just say this, Mike, that one of the things we can do is we'll be talking a little bit more about VAWA confidentiality, but VAWA confidentiality are provisions that it's a statute that defines what immigration enforcement can occur vis-a-vis a victim, under what circumstances. And there are really, really good people at the Department of Homeland Security that we work with, that we continue to work with, who are really good on these issues. And so we're able to try, what we're able to do in the case Mike called on is we were able to get them to see what was happening on their end, and ultimately no notice to appear and no immigration kind of enforcement or anything happened against the victim that Mike was working with.
Right. Yes, it was a definite happy ending in that scenario. So that brings us to this slide that talks about some of the resources for us in law enforcement, and I consider that that's TA with a peer and others in that situation. But we do, I know NIWAP offers very streamlined direct technical assistance with peers. So you may call as a prosecutor with an issue that you need some help with, maybe some things are happening in court because it's being brought up that the 918B was signed by either yourself or law enforcement, and you could reach out to NIWAP's TA and end up getting one of the consultants, the prosecutor consultants that's on staff, to kind of walk through the scenario and give you some really good tools to overcome that. And that holds true for prosecutors, advocates, law enforcement agencies, and everybody in between. So there's a whole lot of peer-to-peer training, technical assistance, that happens. On-site training, Leslie, I know you I think you covered that earlier when you talked about some of the things that can happen. But specific law enforcement training on the U-Visa certification process, language access, what it means to law enforcement. We as in the NIWAP team, are available to bring that to communities. And there's a link coming up that you could actually click on, and you could, you could request to bring that training to your jurisdiction. The toolkit is a document that was put together through NIWAP and a bunch of consultants. That is I call it, for lack of a better term, I call it the Bible of U-Visas. And if you read that document, a lot of your questions get answered. There's model policies that are in there. There's all kinds of support information and documentation, DHS memos, just a wealth of information that can help jurisdictions and law enforcement agencies comply with Title VI and recognize and understand the U-Visa process and what it really is. Because we find going around the country that a lot of the confusion around this and a lot of the lack of support of this relief is due to not understanding really what it is and what it was meant to be and what it can mean for us in law enforcement. So that's a big message that we try to spread as we go across the country. Does anybody else want to add to that from the team?
The one thing, this is Leslie, that I'll add is we have a similar toolkit that we just republished and updated in November 2017 for U-Visa certification by judges, commissioners, magistrates, and the like, and so that's also available. We do a lot of work. We also have, just like we've been talking about, that we have TA providers who are law enforcement, like Mike, who can talk to other law enforcement agencies. We're also connected with a national team of training judges who specialize in this intersection as well, and they can mentor other judges if judges have questions.
Yes, thanks. And here's the slide that talks about that on-site training on these issues for law enforcement. Now, the law enforcement agency has to be the agency that requests this. It's one of the requirements. And the great thing about this is it's free, first of all, and that's important to us in law enforcement. Money becomes an issue a lot of times with bringing national trainers in and getting this type of training off the ground in communities. So it's a free training. You request that. It's funded through a grant that NIWAP has. And now a multidisciplinary team comes in and presents this real valuable information. And another thing that I like about it, there's a lot of stuff that happens on the lead up to the training. So once that site's picked to host the training, NIWAP staff, Leslie Rocio, and everybody else that works with them, including the training team, works with that community to kind of, address some of the issues that may be occurring, answer some of the questions. So the training, although in foundation it is what it is, we do a whole lot of kind of gelling it into that jurisdiction and meet the needs of that jurisdiction. So I really encourage everybody that's on this webinar to look into that and to see if maybe they might have the potential to bring us in or bring the training team in to present the training for you. So the virtual roundtable, I know we mentioned a little bit about that earlier. This is and I apologize, I don't know how to call it. It's not monthly. At one point it was monthly. Are we talking about quarterly now, Leslie Rocio?
I think it's every other month, roughly.
Every other month, yeah. But this is a really great opportunity. It's law enforcement only, which includes, your prosecutors, those that work in the law enforcement umbrella. And we have a different topic every month, and we always take time to make it available for those that are on that roundtable discussion to bring in challenges, bring in scenarios they're dealing with. It's just like, we wouldn't be able to do this in our own communities and bring so many different people in. And now, we're on a national level, and you can join this and bring your local issues and questions and challenges that you're facing and bring them to the group and discuss them and overcome some of the barriers that we all face. And none of us are immune to that. So this is a really good opportunity to get together with, like individuals that are dealing with some of the same situations that you may be. And may have, some of the people on the call, what we found is they've already faced those issues and reached out to TA or have found a way to overcome them. And it really becomes a real good conversation. And we're really, we're really grateful that we have the opportunity to do that every couple months. So definitely look for that. And I think we might have included a way to do that coming up. There you go. To join the roundtables, invite your law enforcement prosecutor partners, and that's how you register for that. And what's the date of the next one that we have coming up?
Rocio, do you know? I'll have to look it up.
I think June 28th I have at 2 o'clock on my schedule for one that's coming up.
We have one before then for sure.
April 26th.
Okay.
I'm giving you guys a sneak peek into the scheduling of the roundtables. So definitely take a look at that April 26th date, and there'll be some information that'll be going out to everyone on what the topic will be.
Great. Okay, on VAWA, I'm trying to do a process, which is not easy. I'm trying to put the link for the VAWA confidentiality materials in as a start here. I think I've got it, more or less. Hopefully that's the right one. So I'm going to talk now. We're going to go back to our case scenario, and we're going to talk about the client again who's come in and she's nervous. What is it that you think she might be afraid would happen if she leaves her husband? Can you type in the responses or, speak if we can unmute you? What do you think she's most afraid of? Or some of the things that she's afraid of when she comes in for help? Alienation from her community, looking forward, she's afraid she might lose her children, she's having trouble communicating, she might be accused of abandoning the home, which she, from her home country, it might mean she loses custody of her children. She's afraid of the violence from him, financial stability, not having any support, losing her job, immigration status, correct. She also could be afraid about, maybe her immigration status is tied to him. Maybe he's on a work visa and she has, her visa is dependent on him. Maybe, she has a pending case. Maybe he's told her he'll file papers for her. There's a lot of issues. And that we find actually when you look at the social science research in this area, that the top reasons, the top things that victims are afraid of include fear of deportation, and fear of losing their children, and fear of retaliation. Those are three of them. Not being able to take their pets is a big issue for everybody, not only immigrant victims. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk about some special protections for immigrant crime victims that are contained in this law that we've been referring to, which is called VAWA confidentiality. And this is, Michael's case is an example of the TA we do around VAWA confidentiality. But essentially, VAWA confidentiality has three prongs. There's the one that you're used to seeing. Once a victim files an immigration case, then the victim, then the information contained in that immigration case about the immigration case file or about what ruling or what the outcome of the immigration case are confidential. They can't be released to anyone, including the perpetrator. The other thing that's important about VAWA confidentiality is it basically says that DHS is barred by statute from relying upon perpetrator-provided information. So tips from perpetrators turning in victims, they're not supposed to be relying on as a matter of federal law. This protection applies to anybody who's abused by a spouse or parent, whether or not they file an immigration case, but generally speaking, the sooner one files an immigration case, when the case is filed, it goes into a special system, a computer system at Department of Homeland Security that flags the case to inform immigration enforcement officials that this is a crime victim, so that they're not tricked into being sent after a victim by a perpetrator. There are also locational protections that protect all victims. And so there are certain locations where immigration enforcement activities are not supposed to occur. And if they are going to occur at any of these locations, the DHS officials who show up there have to prove that they didn't rely on perpetrator-provided information to get there. And generally speaking, they should have gone through formal channels, have gotten supervisor approval to go after a victim at any of these locations. And we do a lot of work around technical assistance around VAWA confidentiality. We have webinars, training materials, manual chapters that take you step by step in case planning, and how to prevent confidentiality violations, how to help if they happen. We have the legislative history. The web page I sent around has all of the documents that Department of Homeland Security has ever written on VAWA confidentiality and its legislative history, brochures, and lots of technical assistance. We probably, in the immigration world, makes up, we do a number of these cases every month. So we're really there to help you on these violations. And what I can say is one of the things that we talk about when we talk about case strategies is that what this means is, for the family lawyers on the call, is if in fact you go to get a protection order or you file your divorce or custody case first, when and if, but usually when, the perpetrator calls to turn the victim in at Department of Homeland Security, if she doesn't have an immigration case pending, they don't have a red flag in their system. Whereas if she's already filed at least a basic VAWA or U visa case, by the time, and by the way, I saw a question I just want to answer that came up in the chat, is that the VAWA and the U visa not only protect the victims themselves, but they can protect undocumented parents of child victims. So the child might be a U.S. citizen victim of child abuse. Mother's undocumented, she can file for U visa or VAWA. It depends on the kind of case. So if the case is already in the system, the immigration enforcement official was supposed to have seen the red flag and is deemed to basically have looked for it, whether or not they did, but hopefully they do. That's the procedures. And that they shouldn't, does really help get some real protection to remove this deportation threat as an issue in cases of immigrant survivors. Okay. So the last thing I wanted to talk about, we're going to talk about today, or one of the last things, is the work that we do around public benefits, which again is a huge part of the work we do. It's right up there with family law. And in fact, we looked at some data. We were doing our grant reports last week and saw that one of the most accessed documents on our website is our public benefits map. And we're in the process of creating state-by-state maps that are even more detailed. So going back to the case of the survivor that we started with, One of her concerns is, she doesn't have any money. And, the question is that there, with immigrant survivors, what happens is that once somebody files for immigration relief, that immigration relief will lead, when their case is granted or preliminary approved at least, to access to legal work authorization. But prior to that time, certain forms of immigration relief come with certain forms of access to benefits. So benefits access is a big part of the case. So from your perspective, in terms of what you know so far, what kind of benefits and services can any victim receive? Can this victim in the story receive? What is she entitled to as a matter of law? Anybody? Everybody stop typing. Anybody can share some things they think, or anybody on the phone want to jump in? What kinds of things can an undocumented victim get without regard to immigration status? Shelter. That's correct. Crime victim.
So crime victim reparation, immigration health, emergency health care, food pantry.
Yep.
WIC and therapy. If the children are U.S. citizens, she might be available for shelter and food stamps.
She can get actually shelter no matter what without regard to immigration status, including transitional shelter, but food stamps she could get for her children, or food pantries she can get no matter what. Correct.
Great. We have a great list of participants that are typing protection order, shelter, counseling, school.
General assistance, actually undocumented, it depends on the state, but undocumented victims generally don't qualify for general assistance in TANF. We'll talk in a minute about some of those kinds of things, but any services, court advocacy, case management provided by a shelter, exactly. So this is a list of what people could get. So some people, I noticed, people didn't say legal services. Actually, any immigrant survivor who's a victim of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, stalking, dating violence is eligible for legal services from any agency without regard to the victim's immigration status. As it's called the anti-abuse track of representation. They're certainly able to use LAV money for it and even LSC, Legal Services Corporation money. They can go to court and get all kinds of protection orders, divorce, custody. I litigated 800 cases back in the 80s and 90s representing immigrant survivors who were undocumented and won custody and child support and spousal support, divorce. Immigration status can be raised as a factor, but it is not. With good advocacy and litigation, family lawyers are able to be very successful. They can get protection orders, have their perpetrators criminally prosecuted. As I said, transitional housing is open to anyone without regard to immigration status. And so programs shouldn't be restricting access to transitional housing for immigrant victims. And they, as we talked about earlier, can get public benefits that their children qualify to receive. This is a picture of our public benefits map where you can click on your state and then you can click on, when you check on your state, you can check on like TANF or healthcare or post-assault healthcare, and it will take you into information. We're in the process in the next 6 months of updating this to make it even more interactive and to connecting you with a lot more resources on public benefits. Before I turn the floor over to Aparna, I do want to say that this is another area that what happens is with immigrant survivors is as they begin to apply for immigration status, their access to public benefits, publicly funded benefits grows. So, for example, within 3 months of filing a vow of self-petition, she's eligible for post-secondary educational grants and loans, and so are her children. The moment she files a vow of self-petition, she's eligible for public and assisted housing, so she could remove her perpetrator from the public housing unit and stay there with her kids and get the funding. So the sooner you file the immigration case, the more access to public benefits that people get beyond what everybody gets, the things I was talking to you about. Aparna.
Hello, everyone. How are you? So I'm here to talk about kind of as an advocate that you can have a strong role. And so sometimes we don't always have the law enforcement officers or the attorneys who may have the same information or the folks who may not be available for our clients. And so that's why one of the important things is as advocates knowing that you can get technical assistance and still make change in your community. And I think, you know, I have used NIWAP and Leslie and Michael and Rocio over the years for many things in Georgia because we don't have access to the same training. So I know Michael's come in and trained law enforcement, and it's helped kind of shift the officers into rethinking how they look at U visas. I know that in one situation during a family law case, the abuser's attorney wanted to get information on the U visa filing, and so that's where we had to access Leslie to try and protect the client's file and to work with the attorneys to kind of file the right stuff because, you know, we were in that situation in the first place because we had a family law attorney who agreed to share immigration documents without knowing any better. And that's where, you know, utilizing Leslie and having her provide technical assistance in that situation was really useful. So I think one of the things is, number one, is advocates knowing that you have power, you don't have to always be an attorney, that you can help, you know, provide support and put on training so that you can build allies with the existing people in your community, and that's where using the technical assistance and sending the memos can make a huge difference because I have a lot of situations not being an attorney where I have to kind of challenge people and say, I'm sorry, no, this is true and here's the information, you know, about the rights or VAWA confidentiality to kind of help people know what the rights are for our clients. Anything else y'all want me to say?
Could you give an example from a public benefits perspective of some of the different kinds of things we've helped you guys with?
Oh, see, Georgia's so weird on public benefits.
We did a big housing one with you guys.
Yeah, so yeah, that was a great one. You know, and I thought about that one. So my coworker was having a hard time getting transitional housing for one of the immigrant survivors we were working with, and the shelter kept denying her access, but they didn't even know why they were denying her access. So I know Leslie took a lot of time working with my colleague to kind of figure out what types of grants were available, but it's not been uncommon for like shelters to say, okay, well, you know, because she's on this visa or because she's undocumented, she has no access to transitional housing. And a lot of times our mainstream, you know, shelter partners don't know what's available and aren't aware of the rights of many of the survivors we're working with.
Great. Thank you, Aparna. So essentially, I just want to review in conclusion, and I want to say, I know people have been mentioning my name. I'm Leslie. One thing I can tell you, a trick about our technical assistance, if you want a really quick response, usually within 24 hours, don't email me personally. Email our info@niwap.org box, which is man or woman, depending on the day, by interns all the time, and me and Rocio and Edna Yang or Michael or some of our law enforcement or prosecution partners will get back to you very quickly. And so to recap, some of the things that we offer, again, we have our web library, tech assistance, the directory. Rocio, were you going to say something? No? Okay. Trainings and webinars. We have all kinds of materials that we reference throughout this, bench cards and toolkits and and access to materials from the Department of Homeland Security and other government, HUD and HHS and other government agencies as well. These are the links to sign up for the roundtables and the community of practice. We will send these links to all of you by email. Through your registration link, we'll send them to you so you'll have them handy if you didn't capture them as they were going through the chat. And that we have this webinar information is available at this Go link, which again we'll send you by email. And again, please call us anytime, leave a message, call our info box, and go to our web library for information. And I just want to say thank you for all of the work that you're doing. All the laws that we have all worked on, writing laws and policies and making this possible for immigrant survivors, actually don't work without all the work that people like Susan and Carly and Michael and Aparna and all of you are doing every day. So thank you so much for your work, and we're here to help. Don't hesitate to give us a call or send us an email. Have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks.